Hello and welcome to Ivory Blush Roses. My name is Lisa and today we're on week 5 of our sampler project. We're going to be continuing with buttonhole or blanket stitch this month, and today I have we have 5 variations. One is sort of a positive and negative that we're going to sort of stitch on the same seam. I want to share with you, in the Crazy Club group that I've been leading, we have been working on buttonhole stitches as well. And I wanted to share with you the sampler one of the participants has been making. Sydnie is a fabulous stitcher, and she's really taken this buttonhole sampler to heart, and I love what she's doing on it so far. So here's a look at Sydnie's sampler. Leave some positive comments for her in the comment section below. I really love what she's doing on this sampler. Let's go ahead and get started. I am working on a 4-seam block on this one. On this tutorial, let me just show you something that I've done. A lot of times when I'm looking at a block, if I'm having a hard time figuring it out, and especially on a sampler block like this where I want to make sure I've got room for every stitch and everything balances nice, I actually took and made a quick sketch of the block, and then I've just sketched out the pattern of where I'm going. And I found that really helpful to have, and I can set it here. A lot of times I just stitch spontaneously. I let things evolve as they will. On a project like this where I want it to balance, I did find that very helpful. We're going to be doing some marking on this one just because I want to make sure we're keeping everything nice and even. I think we'll just stitch 1/8 of an inch apart. Now we're going to do the one along the seam first because what we do on that one is going to impact what we do on the following one. So I'm looking at where my blue lines are as well as my basting. Remember that my basting is outside of my blue line. I've got some dots and I'm just going to mark 1/8 of an inch and try not to move the ruler when you're doing it. Normally I would be doing this flat on the table surface rather than up in my stand because the stand does make it a little bit harder to be accurate. And again, I'm just making those little twisting dots. I'm just going to go one outside of my stitch there as we go. This is one that has no name to it. It's really very similar to the long and short ones that we've done, but on this one I really wanted to show you that it makes a difference which side you do your base stitch on. On this one, our base stitch is going to be along the seam, and we're going to be doing little peaks and valleys. I'm just going to mark that just so that I know that's going to be my peak. Marking that middle one. So we'll say these are about 1 inch. Now I don't want to make this 1 inch tall. Let's make that 3/8 of an inch. So 3/8 of an inch. And I'm going to line up with this and pull out to those 2 dots that I made. And now I'm going to come up, and that's going to be my peak, 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 peak. Now I'm just going to come in and draw my triangular lines. I tend to go all one way first. 1, 2, 3, yeah. I want them a little darker because this is a long seam. I want to make sure my marks last, and I don't need to do that one, but I do need to come, and so I should really have marked this one out here. So now we're going to come and go the other way. This is one of those times where I do mark when everything is very geometric and I want it to really maintain that. I mark. And this one is one that will definitely look better if everything is exact. So that's why I'm marking. And that first one is already fading, so let me mark that again. Because this is a big doubled stitch, it's going to be pretty wide. I'm going to use this variegated pink thread that I have. And this one we're going to stitch just like we've been doing. It doesn't matter which end I start from, it's just a matter of what feels comfortable to me. 1, 2, 3. So there should be 3 stitches in between. So 1, 2, 3, and that's my peak. I'm going to start out here in the seam. And like I said, I really feel like this is one of those stitches. It doesn't matter which handed you are because you can work it both directions and it should work out just fine. Coming up on my dot. There's my next one. So I know I want to come out to that point. If I were stitching the other way, it would be easier for me to tell where I am. We're just going to kind of wing this one here and try and get it nice and straight. This one, where it's really tiny, I am still going to make just a teeny tiny buttonhole stitch. I just want to carry my stitch through, carry that pattern through. Got my thread twisted there. So you see just a really short one. And now I'll be coming straight up above that one. And we'll just keep working the same way across. We've stitched this kind of stitch before, so I'm not going to show everything for this stitch. Let's go back to that very first block. Effectively, this stitch that I'm doing is the same as this one that we did on the very first block. It's exactly the same, and we're doing this all the way across this seam. And the reason I'm doing this because we're going to do a slightly different variation that's going to play off of that block. So like I said, this is actually a 4-seam block because I wanted a little more room for this particular seam since it's going to be pretty big. You can always choose whichever block you want, and you don't have to stitch these two together if you don't want. Let me stitch this and then I will be back. So I'll do these last two with that long stitch out across the bottom right there. Whoops, and I forgot to go underneath it. Hold on. Let's come back up at our dot. For my purposes, I prefer it with the stitch, but we're going to leave it that way so it just shows a difference. This is a sampler. Samplers are a learning tool. They're not meant to be high art. Sometimes you learn as much from the mistakes as you do from doing everything absolutely correct. So don't hesitate to leave your mistakes in on your sampler piece because that can help you see what not to do. And I think we're going to call that good. So I'll take it off into my seam allowance and then I will make my knot on the back. Now let's come in and mark the other side of our seam. How close do we want it? In my drawing I've left it almost a ½ inch. I think we're going to go 1/4 inch. So I'm going to mark 1/4. And we're going to mark that 1/4 on the inside as well because we're going to need that mark in 2 spots. So 1/4 inch here. There's our peaks. We're lined up. So actually this is going to be the valleys on this one. Do I have them all marked? And then we're going to mark our peaks. Again, trying to be nice and symmetrical with it. And I don't think I need that marked there. And so we're going to be doing the same thing, except this time, instead of having a straight edge along here on this side, we're going to do it so that our edge is on the peaks and valleys part. This is going to be our bottom edge along here. So let's go ahead and mark those out. Again, I'm trying to do it dark enough that it'll last long enough. I know some of these pens say they last for 48 hours, but I have not found that. Any moisture, and so that's humidity. If your hands are damp, then that goes away. And now I'm going to continue to mark my 1/8 inch marks on the bottom side. I'm going to start marking down here. So lining it up carefully with the center of the peaks, which is there. And I have to carry it off all the way down, so I did need this line here. Like I said before, this is easier if you're marking it on a flat surface and not here on the frame. So we have our dots now on that side. I'm using the same thread just because I think it'll help it look better on this particular piece. This time, instead of having the base here on this side, we're going to put it on the peaks and valleys. It's going to be a slight bigger challenge to get your thread straight. But we're going to come to our dot. And so this is one where it's going to be really helpful to use your thread as a guide where that vertical is. And you want to be perpendicular to this side. So coming up on the inside on that peaking line, down at the dot, hold my thread vertical, come up on the line. And so the base of the stitch is on the angle now rather than in this. Now let's look at what happens here at the peak, because on this one, when I come back this way, do you see how that's going to round over? So I can, to really make that a nice fine point, just take a little back stitch in there and then come right up on the inside, and that will keep that tip nice and sharp. Now we're going to come down to our dot, hold that up vertical. You can see how nice and sharp that peak is coming out. So down to our dot, hold your thread vertical, down to our dot, this one almost has a sort of positive and negative effect when you're stitching it this way. On this one, I'm going to come down, and I do want to do my little buttonhole because we need to make this angle back here. I'm going to say that's my dot. We're going to go on the bottom side of that dot, and I'm going to come up on the top side of the dot. Make sure your threads are pulling correctly. But now I'll get that sharper angle for coming this way. So again, I'm going to go down on my dot. Keep that thread perpendicular. Come up on the inside of it, preferably without stitching through it. Down on the dot. And I just stitched through it, so I'm backing my needle out, trying again. Come up on the inside. You don't want to stitch through it because then you can't pull it through. There we go. Hold it up perpendicular to that bottom line, or to that bottom row of dots in this case. Now we're up at my peak. To keep my peak nice and tight, I'm going to stitch just as close as I can go. I just want to lock that in place right there at the peak, and then come up right again inside, close as you can go. Now we'll work our way down the other peak. And I'm just sort of eyeballing this. Now I can see that I'm pulling my stitches a little tight, and maybe my fabric isn't as tight in the frame as I would like. So I am going to tighten that up a little bit because I don't want to be able to pull it that tight or I'm buckling the fabric. So let's hope that does the job. And that means my tension, I'm pulling it a little too tight. Let's pull that up. So you want it tight enough to keep your angle, but not so tight that it buckles the fabric. Don't forget to pull that end down the thread. And I can already tell I'm doing a better job there. It's not as tight. See, if I pull it tight, how it buckles? We want to loosen that tension if you see that happening. Don't pull it quite so snug. It'll still be snug enough. And so this is the one we're going to go down on the bottom side of the dot. And we're going to come up just above it. Again, it's really just a locking stitch that we're doing. Locking in that curve. And now back up. So let's see if we can do this one with a little less buckling. So down on the dot. Hold it up perpendicular. Down on the dot. Come up inside that thread on the line. Trying not to pull quite so tight. And I think we're looking better already. No buckling. So just that smidge and looser tension makes all the difference on that. And that'll be important because when you take this off, you want it to stay nice and flat. If you've got it in a hoop or a frame, you want it to be as flat when you take it out as it is when you're stitching in the frame. That's actually one of the purposes of using a hoop or a frame, so that you're not buckling. But thread tension makes a difference. And I can see that thread has gotten a little bit bunched up, so I need to pull the tension on some of these threads to make them even. And when that happens, you can see how it's gotten a loop here. I'm actually going to take my needle out. I'm going to pull down my thread. You can see that pushing up in front there. There, and now my threads are even again. That just happens when you're working with stranded floss. It's just a pretty normal occurrence. So sometimes you just have to take it out, correct it, and then go back. I find that if I leave it in the needle, I don't get as good a correction. Now we're back down to our dot. Come up just inside. And back on the bottom side of that dot. Come up just barely above it, just a thread above it is all we're doing. And then, where are we at here? 1, 2, 3. So there's our next one. I don't think in our other stitches we did any where we were doing the base on the angle like this. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to include this pair of stitches in this stitching session for the sampler. They each have a very different impact. Again, we're going to lock that just as close as we can go. And then basically we're still trying to come up in effectively the same hole we were in before. Down on the bottom one and come up just above it. Think of this, whether you're doing curves or triangles, which side you're putting the straight on. Changing where the base is can really make a difference in how the whole thing looks. And I think we did that when we were doing the curved buttonhole. We did one that was to the inside, so very similar to this. But it's nice having one here where you can really look at it together and compare immediately what the difference is. I think that was supposed to be our peak. I'm going to take that one out and restitch that. I got a little off there, so we're just going to fudge. And we're going to come back up closer up here. And I think if I loosen this one up, that actually works. And again, at the tip, we're just coming up right in that same spot. And we're almost done with this. Here's my seam. So we're now outside of the seam, so I'm just going to go ahead and finish there and knot that off on the back. You can really see the strong line on the peaks and valleys there, which you don't see here. And so here you see it on the top. It's fun to play with it and layer it. Watch your tension so you don't get that buckling taking place. That is a fun one. So it's a peaks and valleys with the base of the stitch on different sides. The next stitch that we're going to do is another one that's going to be similar to other things that we've done. Instead of the legs of the buttonhole or blanket stitch coming perpendicular to our base stitch, like this one, it's going to be more like this, but we're going to be doing some big triangles over here. I think we're going to try and fit about 2.5 of those in there. And I am going to mark this. Let's see what we have. So we have about 3 inches. I don't really want 3 triangles. Do I want a full 3 here? We're going to go just a little bit bigger. So we're going to go here, here. I'm going to go 1 1/8 on this one. And then we're going to go up about 5/8 of an inch. So that's going to be up in there. So I'm just going to mark 5/8 of an inch in a couple of spots and just make a light line across there so I can see. When I've got an odd number like this and I want to center it, I just sort of evenly divide that space, and I'm just going to come up to that other line, and I want to be able to see about an equal amount of space on either side, and I'm going to mark my peak in between, and then I'm going to do the same thing when I get to this one here. Here's going to be my peak. So I can make a little bigger line if I need to. So we're going this way, kind of running into my frame here, and there's going to be my peak there. So we have peak, peak, and peak. I'm going to draw my lines here, and I want to look at where my 5/8 inch mark was. So it's nice when you're doing projects like this to vary the size of things a little bit, because it can all start to look very samey or matchy-matchy as some people would say, if you're keeping everything exactly in the same proportion. So I like to mix it up. When I'm coming along here, I'm going to be making my branches. They're going to come off this way, but they're going to come off that way on each of these. So it has sort of this windswept look. I don't think there's a proper name for this, so I'm just going to call it Windswept Buttonhole. How many stitches do I want? Let's try this one. How many do we get in if we do that? 1, 2, 3, 4. What if we do it this way? 1, 2, 3, 4. That will do. So I'm going to just mark. This is a 3/16 inch grid. So put one at the top and then just come down it, but don't put one at the bottom. And then we're going to do that, go in the other direction as well. Except I don't need one at the top here, but now I need one at the bottom. And we'll just do that for each of these. And so I'm marking these all from the top so that it will be more symmetrical when it's all said and done. You just play around with what you're doing. So this one I'm going to start over here. I'm going to make my buttonhole. We're going to start coming up here. I'm using the variegated floss on this one. And so this time I want to come out parallel to my seam. And you can decide how long you want those. It could be long or short, medium. I'd say I'm going pretty medium here. And I'm going to come back to my dot. So this one I would pull this way to see where I'm coming. Now I want to keep that going up on that same line. And again, taking care not to buckle. Where's my mark? Well, I'm all twisted up here. Hold on. Lay it out so it's parallel to my seam. Come up on the inside, not through preferably, like I think I just did. Let's just go ahead and pull that through before I put the needle on. Going parallel to the seam, I'm making a straight line up the side there. I'm going to hold that off this way, stitch to the inside of it, not through it. That one might have been a little short. And then we're going to go over here. So exaggerate a little bit. And then coming up. There. And now this one, we're going to come out here. So we're going to really continue making the same stitch. So I'm locking that. Let's go ahead and keep stitching this one the way we're going. Again, I'm coming up just inside. And now this one is going to come out here. I'm thinking parallel to my seam. Hold that out perpendicular. I think there's our dot. So it should be about across from the others that we've done. And so on this bottom one here, there's no room to put a stitch on the inside. So we're going to come over here. We do have to do a locking stitch at each corner no matter which way we stitch. Okay, and now we're coming right back up on the inside, trying to come up in effectively the same hole I went down on. so it helps keep the pattern going. Again, trying to come out parallel to that seam. And it should line up with what you've done previously. And I find you really are having to exaggerate those so that they're long enough so that they all match in length. Now we're going to be here. Now we're going to be coming up and finishing that line there. See, I pulled that one too tight, so loosen that up. Now we're going to lock that. Get that nice point going. And then coming up, and now we're going to come back down the same way. Realize I'm not getting parallel to my seam here, and so they're starting to slant, so I want to watch that. I don't want them to slant. For this one to look its best, you really want them, and I've got my thread all twisted around there, so pull that back, keep that thread parallel, come up on the inside from where you're at. And now we're going to come over here and make this one. And we're going to come back. And we're going to lock that. And then come up just as close on the inside here as we can go. Now we're going to go there. Come up here. I'm still pretty close here, so I'm going to take that one off and finish this one to get outside of my seam. Now I'm out in the seam allowance. I'm going to go down and lock that in. And there we have sort of our windswept buttonhole with all the legs going off the triangles in one direction. It's really interesting the way the variegations of the thread worked out. You would think I've stitched each one of these legs with a different thread, but it's really the variegation. It just happened to fit right on to that. That was a completely unanticipated event. We have 2 more stitches left to go. The first one we're going to do is another variation on a fan stitch. So the ones we did last week were in semicircles. And this one is still going to be based off of that, but now we're going to actually carry it from a point so that it's a whole fan. And truthfully, it almost looks like a whole shell when we do this. On this one, we may want our circle template. I want my ruler because we're going to do this one on this seam right here. It's right about 2 inches, give or take, so we're just going to divide that in half and go from point to point. So here's our center line. And I'm just drawing that down because I just want to see where it's at. And now I'm going to get my circle template, and I want to find one that will cover that whole distance. I need a little bigger than that. That's good. I like that one. You can see here's my points. I've got enough room for my pen line on the inside of that, so there we go. And we're going to do the same thing over on this side. Looking at this, and this is not in the center, that's the center here. So we're going to come straight down the center, perpendicular. We're coming off of here. Let's recheck this one as well, because if one is wrong, I think that one's just a hair off. Once we get the circle on, it was easier to see where it was. I'm just going to draw that down there. And I want to think about how far down do I want to come. I'm thinking there looks pretty good. Yeah, let's just go with that. I technically don't really need these lines, but we're going to draw them in just so you can see what we're doing here. Let's do these two in this brighter green. On this one, we're going to have everything coming down to this point here. And so I need to think about how many spokes do I want as we go around. So just like we have here, how the base of the stitch goes up, we want the base of this stitch to be on the top. That's going to be really important. I kind of like the idea of having 5 segments. So if this is my center, I don't want to come to that, but I want to come either side of it. So let's just divide the rest of that in half. So I'm going to do the same thing. There's my center. I'm going to come off to the side, and I'm just kind of eyeballing what I think looks like 5 roughly even segments in that. We know from before that if I don't start with a straight stitch here, it's going to look a little funny. So we're going to start, I'm going to take that from the base, I'm going to go out to my center point here, and we are going to be stitching through roughly that same point on all of this. And now I'm going to come back out here, and we're going to come back to center. We don't have so many spokes. The more spokes you have, the more you're going to have trouble with it bunching up, like we talked about last week. You want to space them a little bit so they're maybe not all quite in exactly the same spot, but with 5 spokes it shouldn't be too much of an issue. And again, watch your tension, don't get it pulled too tight. You want it tight enough but not too tight. Now we're going to put in the next one. Come back up to this spot here. And see that I pulled way too tight, so loosen it up. Then pull it once you have it in position is generally the best way I have found. Now we're going to come up here. And so if you look at that and you think, oh, that's going to be off a little bit, you can always adjust it. You don't have to stitch exactly on your mark. Use your best judgment. And then we're going to come here. I can just go ahead and take my straight stitch right down. And then we're going to come back up. And I can go ahead and come right through that. And again, back to center. Coming up on the top of the fan. Back to center. Coming up here. This one is fun because you get that more complete fan look. And so you can think about all the different ways you could embellish this fan. Back to center. And we're going to come right back down here. And that's the end of that seam, so we're going to go ahead and go over that thread as close as we can and lock it down. And there we have 2 little shell fans. I love those. Think about running another row of outline stitch or chain stitch across the top of those, or even across the center, and you can really get some interesting patterns with that. One more seam to go, and we're going to do that down on this one. I'm going to get my thread. So this is a paler green variegated pearl cotton. On this one, we're going to do more triangles, but we're going to do triangles that kind of based off of this pattern here. And we're going to bring them off of here. So I'd love to do 3 along there. So how much space? We're 2¼ inches. So I have to stop and think a minute, folks. Hold on. Let's do 3/4 inch fans on that one. That works out nicely in that 2¼ inches. To make it a little bit different, I'm thinking let's go out about 3/8 of an inch. I'm just going to draw my light line out here. So half of 3/4 is 3/8, and I'm just going to mark my peaks. So there's my peaks. On this one, I think we want to probably do 5. We're still stitching about every 1/8 of an inch on this. I think that gives us the right number of stitches. We want a stitch coming up right at that peak, and that gives us 1 there and then 2 in between. On this one, like this, our base of the stitch, we don't have a curve on it this time, but it's going to be this straight. And so we're going to come down here. Again, we're going to make our straight stitch out to the point. And then we're going to come back up right where we came up before. And now we're going to go down here. You could put however many segments you want in here. I just picked a number that I thought sounded good to me. I'm really relying on my marks on this one. Now this one should be vertical. So they're all going to radiate a little bit. Don't pull so tight you buckle your fabric. And we can see a little bit of that twisting going on up here at the peak. I'm going to try and avoid that here. Try and stitch to the outside of my thread there. Now this one, because we're making that sharp angle here, and if I pull this way, it's going to round a little bit. That's going to be okay because we're going to come back up through that to make that next stitch. I'm actually going to come up just on the close side of my dot and see if that helps us. And I'm going to come back up just inside there, and that will help hold that angle nice and tight. And we're going to try similar to what we did with the buttonhole fans, where we're radiating our stitches out around that dot just a little bit. Because we have 7 stitches in this one, and in these last fans we did, we had 6. I still want to be in the center, but I'm trying to go around that stitch so that I'm not making it bunch up and twist. And then we have one more, and that should get us down to our bottom point. Now we're going to go up to this one. We're going to go straight. That's our straight stitch. Come back up just inside. And now we're going to go almost to center, but I'm coming just inside that other stitch. And I made my dots a little bit high, so I'm trying to go straight down from where they're at on that. Now this one should be our vertical. I like doing these with a vertical stitch in the center. I suppose you don't have to have one there, but I do think it helps your things come to that nice point. So it's just simply radiating those stitches in a slightly different manner than what we've done so far. And it gives it a completely different look. And I'm just going to come off out into my seam area. And then I'll make a knot, and that is done. There is our block for today with our kind of mirrored stitches, one with the base along the bottom of the triangles, the other with the base of the buttonhole done on the peaks and valleys. Then we have our kind of windswept buttonhole. We have our buttonhole fans or shells done this way, and then our triangles done radiating to that point. And these are all fun ones, and these are ones I don't see done very often, but they offer just so many possibilities for different things that you could do. I hope you've enjoyed coming along and learning these 5 additional buttonhole stitches. Next week we're going to actually be working on leaf motifs, so stay tuned for that one. Thanks for coming. Have a beautiful day, happy stitching, and I will see you in the next video.